The title of this video poses a question we're sure many Berserk fans have been thinking about for years, especially now that Miura sensei has passed on. This journey began all the way back in 1989, has survived a complete overhaul in the way manga is created, and is still far from being over. As crazy as it sounds, over 30 years later, we're just entering what feels like the penultimate arc of Berserk. We're only 3 episodes deep into the Eastern Exile Chapter, and already things feel beyond hopeless. Our heroes are gearing up to face Griffith's war demons, they're divided because they don't trust each other, and worst of all, Guts is not exactly in fighting shape. The future's looking rather bleak right now, and we don't think the upcoming chapters will hold anything good for it either. So, if the Eastern Exile is the penultimate chapter, what might transpire in the finale? And will it be what Berserk fans have been waiting literal decades for? We'll be exploring all that and more in this video. Things as they stand right now. Falconia versus the Kushan Empire. When this story began, we were made to believe that there were only 2 major players in it, Guts and Griffith. But, as is the case with any epic saga, that changed as more characters came into play. The Black Swordsman arc did the perfect job of establishing the lore and background of Berserk and introducing the God Hand as its major antagonists, with Guts versus Griffith being its core conflict. The intrigue that was created by the brief flashback in the arc's final chapter was definitely satiated by the time the next arc concluded, though not in a way that any of us might have expected. I mean, sure, Guts being an eye short and an arm less should have tipped us off to what might have gone down, but nothing about that prelude could have prepared us for the actual thing. Stories are living creatures that ebb and flow and change with the times. We're sure that Miura made several edits to everything he did after that first arc because he was essentially playing catch up to it chronologically speaking, but even so, he introduced so many characters during the Golden Age that continue to play massive roles in the series. The original Band of the Falcon became the only real family Guts had ever known, with Judo, Pippin, Rickard, and even Corcus becoming his friends. He met the love of his life serving under Griffith when he finally confessed to Casca. He met one of his greatest enemies in Nosferatu Zod, and one of his greatest allies in the Skull Knight. He met the creator of his future blade, Dragon Slayer, during the year he spent away from the Falcons, and his brief encounter with Salat during an arms tournament became the basis for an entire Empire's storyline. Even Puck, a character Guts encountered 2 years after the Golden Age, somehow ends up figuring into its events, and the current timeline of Berserk wouldn't exist without her esteemed majesty, the Princess Charlotte. We've said this a million times on this channel, but Miura's storytelling skills were on par with his artistry, and his artistry is peak. All of these characters end up becoming drivers of the Guts v Griffith rivalry, whether they realize it or not, and along the way, several new characters have emerged on both sides. When the eclipse happened, and then the narrative shifted to right after the Black Swordsman arc, we thought that's when things were going to begin wrapping up. Instead, Guts acquired a new crew, Griffith acquired a new body and a new army, and the people of planet Earth acquired an entirely new world. The eclipse changed the entire dynamic of Berserk in a way that felt earth-shattering, even though we technically knew it was going to happen. Guts lost his closest friends to ravenous, cannibalistic demons, and his lover's virtue and sanity was stolen by the man he once aspired to become like. His conflict with Griffith from the Black Swordsman arc made a lot more sense in the aftermath of the eclipse, as did his rage. We can't even begin to imagine bearing witness to the horrors that Guts has lived through, and his unilateral war against all demonkind feels justified, if not entirely practical or sensible. After all, Griffith replaced his friends with demons, made their greatest enemy his personal chariot, and kidnapped his girl, making him go through his most painful moment in life all over again. While the eclipse remains the most infamous turning point in manga history, it was just the first of 3 in this story. Over the course of the next 200 chapters, Griffith managed to incarnate as a physical being on Earth, and then used his previous reputation and relationships as a human to gain quick access to royalty. With the King of Midland out of the way, all he had to do was become Princess Charlotte's knight in shining armor once again, and as it just so happened, she was being held captive by the Dread Emperor, of whom Salat was a subject. Salat's hunt for the Falcon of Prophecy brought him into the crosshairs of Guts and his new group, which included Casca, Farnace, Isidro, and Serpico. The latter 3 were introduced during the Conviction arc and have come to replace Judo, Pippin, and Corcus in Guts' life. He also meets the witch Shirke later in his travels and acquires a relic that his fellow struggler used in the distant past, the Berserker armor. Thanks to these new friends, the Black Swordsman puts his quest for vengeance on pause and focuses on the well-being of Casca for a time. He resolves to get her fixed no matter what, and even lets go of opportunities to face Griffith because it would take away from his new parallel goal. Guts had been so consumed by his own grief that he ignored his way out of it, locking her up in a cave for 2 years. Now that he's realized this, he wasn't going to let go of her so easily, and he even became a lot more comfortable with putting his trust in others once again. In a way, you can say that despite roaming through the endless night wearing an armor that was killing him and fighting dead spirits that wanted to kill him, Guts was finally healing. But causality is a you-know-what, and while he was off doing the right thing, Griffith was busy raising the stakes to a global level. In the beginning, we thought that Berserk was going to be a tale of personal revenge. Guts wanted to hunt Griffith even though Griffith saw him as an inconsequential bug. But as we learned more about the nature of the God Hand and the place that dreams hold in Miura's world, it became clear that this rivalry was one that would come to redefine said world, literally. As an entity that transcends all of space and time, Griffith has the power to alter reality itself, provided certain conditions are met. And he ensures that those conditions are met with him in position as the only prospective king and savior of the world. As of this moment, the entire globe can be divided into 2 halves, those that stand with him and those that stand against him. Through the incarnation ceremony, Griffith was able to bring his divine powers as a God Hand into the physical world, making him appear messianic. The God Hand had already planted enough historical religious context on his behalf that when he did incarnate, he'd immediately be equated with a savior figure. They solidified this notion with the help of the prophetic dreams from the Revelations chapter, which explicitly identified Griffith as the Falcon of Light. From there, it was just a simple matter of getting the Pope to formally anoint him and getting all the pieces into position for the rebirth of the world. Griffith wasted 0 time in betrothing himself to Charlotte, thus becoming the future king consort of Midland and the sole commander of its current regular army. With the Pope's support, his control extended over all allied Holy See territories. In order to ensure that nothing stood in his way, he needed to make the world itself bend to his will, and he accomplished that by merging the physical and astral worlds with the Abyss as its main power source. In a world where his powers reign supreme and give him absolute control over all things in his vicinity, Griffith has finally made tangible progress towards achieving his dream. But he's put an entire planet at risk in the process, and he hasn't exactly been perfect at covering his tracks either. Because now, all the people who know his truth are congregating on the same side. Griffith destroyed the invading army of Emperor Ganishka and utterly ruined the harmony of the Kushan Empire, no matter how blood-soaked it might have been. So now, the remnants of that empire, under the leadership of Salat and Ganishka's former wizard general Daiba, prepare to strike back at the false savior. Guts was focused on getting Casca back to normalcy in the aftermath of the incarnation ceremony. He made it all the way to Elfhelm, where Casca did recover, and Guts finally found a semblance of peace. But that was snatched away from him just as soon because Griffith showed up, destroyed their island, took Casca with him, and left Guts and his remaining allies stranded at sea. As fate would have it, their ship drifted into Kushan waters, and they're now in Salat's court alongside Rickert, the only man to have physically laid hands on Griffith. Rickert was content with living in the hills at Godot's hut with Godot's adopted daughter, but when Griffith triggered the great roar of the astral world, his and Erica's lives were endangered. He traveled to Falconia seeking safety and shelter, but upon realizing that his former leader truly felt no remorse over his current demonic existence and the sacrifice of their friends, he decided he'd rather risk fighting monsters than live with one. His chance encounter with Salat and Daiba in Falconia is what allowed him and Erica to flee to the Kushan capital, and once again, as fate would have it, that's where he reunited with his oldest remaining friend. As of chapter 376, the Kushan are gearing up for a fight against the Falconians, who have already invaded their western borders, which is why we said that the Guts vs. Griffith story has now become global. Kingdoms and empires are involved, and the fate of the world itself hangs in the balance. On one side are the blind white sheep and the sinful black sheep who follow their king and masters lead in all matters without question. On the other side are those whose eyes are open to said king's true nature and who wish to liberate the world from his demonic influence. With the Kushan Empire being the stage for their current showdown, what else do we have to consider when talking about the ending of Berserk? What are the major factors influencing the ending of Berserk? It's pretty clear that the Eastern Exile arc is the penultimate chapter in Kentaro Miura's masterpiece. Whenever creative studios pool all their intellectual property together on either side of a line, it usually signals that the final battle is closer than you think. And to be fair to Studio Gaga and Kujimori, it has already begun. Chapter 376 told us that the Falconians have already invaded the Kushan Empire, which means that we can expect to see some frontline action in the upcoming chapters. Having an army of trained Bakiraka killers and a group of mages being led by the peerless Daiba is certainly an advantage, But we don't know if we can even say that, considering the sheer numbers that Griffith possesses. The Kushan Empire invaded Midland. They did so with nearly 300,000 soldiers. Now granted, many of these soldiers were war slaves picked up during the campaigns, but many were native Kushan men. Thanks to Ganishka's tyranny, many of these men defected to Griffith's reborn Band of the Falcon before the war was even finished, and those who didn't died gruesome deaths. Right now, the Bakiraka clan are the primary muscle of the Empire, and they'd be lucky to have a tenth of Ganishka's numbers. 30,000 trained assassins that can kill you by slashing your neck with a knife they handle with their toes would be a nightmare scenario for a regular army, but Griffith is a smart lad. He knows that in order to maintain his grip over humanity, he can't let them see his actions against astral targets, and he certainly can't let them see his actions against other humans. His quest to rid the world of spirit trees that might impede the growth of his world spiral tree was accomplished solely by his war demons because it included things like killing an old lady and destroying a community that was, by all accounts, a peaceful and harmless village. For his rule to be absolute, Griffith needed to stamp out any who might challenge it. And the more silently he could do that, the better it was for his image. So what we mean by all this is that he would have sent his war demons to Kushan lands first instead of riding into battle with the full force of his human armies. This much was hinted at by the ending of chapter 372, where his new generals, Grunbeld, Locus, Irvine, and Zod asked him what was next, and Griffith simply said, "The East." 30,000 Bakiraka assassins might have torn through Falconia's human elements, but with war demons, numbers don't matter. A single unit of Griffith's inhuman army can wipe them out in an instant, which is why Daiba and his crew of wizards will be crucial to this fight and all those that follow. Not only will they help the Kushan soldiers survive, they'll also provide serious offensive support, because fighting fire with fire is the only answer sometimes. Guts is the main character of Berserk, so of course he's going to be the difference maker for the good guys, but the question is, will he even be able to fight properly? Guts is mentally, emotionally, and physically tapped out. He's lost his will to fight for the first time in his life, and his inner darkness broke free from his control in chapter 373. It's very likely that he'll be a problem before he becomes the solution, so relying on him immediately is out of the question. Salat has him in fetters for a reason. But even if we were to be supremely optimistic and say that Guts, Salat, and the rest of the crew will easily repel the invading wave of war demons, that doesn't even cover half of their real problems. To defeat Griffith, they don't just have to take out his soldiers, they have to uproot his very existence, because the more time he spends on the planet, the more they become one and the same. Besides his war demons, Griffith still has his human army, the ranks of which keep growing with every passing day. It's not even necessary that he send all his war demons to the Kushan Empire either. He has historically used 1 or 2 war demon units to achieve his clandestine goals, and we suspect he'll do the same here. The most likely units to be sent out are Locus, Grunbeld, and Irvine, because they cover the 3 major aspects of warfare: infantry, cavalry, and archery. Locus's war demon lancers made short work of a tidal wave of Pishacha and Daka in Windham. Grunbeld's giant corps can decimate any battlefield within seconds if allowed to run wild. Irvine's archers clear out outposts from miles away. Each of them can annihilate the Kushan forces in 1,000 different ways, so together they're practically unstoppable. At least 1 war demon unit is required to protect Falconia, and considering Zod's soldiers can fly, his unit's probably the one that's been retained. Our assumptions here could be completely incorrect as well, because in truth, the first group that Griffith should send out is his search and destroy unit, but ever since Rakshas was hit with a missile in chapter 341, there's been no word on their captain. I suppose it makes a lot more sense to have him begin the invasion of the Kushan Empire, seeing as he was a Kushan in his human life, and he's got a score to settle with Salat, Rickard, and Daiba, but we'll know the answer to that question soon enough. The ones that remain are these. How do you disconnect the physical and astral worlds, and how do you kill Griffith? Fighting demons in an isolated part of the world and winning against them is well and good, but it's only the first step in the journey. Griffith isn't just Guts' problem anymore, he's the entire world's problem, and he's cleverly barricaded the only way out of his grasp within the courtyard of his castle. Guts and the Kushans can eliminate wave after wave of war demons, but unless they get to the world spiral tree, all of their efforts will have been in vain. The thing that's keeping the astral and physical worlds connected is the world spiral tree. With the elimination of most other spirit trees, including the cherry blossom spirit tree of Elfhelm, it has become the only link between the 2 worlds. As a consequence, the one who controls it controls both worlds, and right now that person is Griffith. The world tree is the biggest factor propelling his illusion of goodness because its very presence turns Falconia into a paradise. The world tree's essence keeps the lands in its vicinity in a perpetual bloom, eliminating food shortages. Its branches allow those that can navigate the dragon path of the astral world unprecedented traveling advantages by accessing sky paths. Its glow seems to keep the people of Falconia in a trance that makes all Falconians subservient to Griffith. So naturally, that makes the World Tree the core of his capital city. And in order to defeat Griffith, you need to do something about it. To get to the tree, you'd have to bypass the streets of Falconia if attacking from land, and the fleets of ships docked at the harbor if attacking from sea. As an enemy gets closer to the Falcon's castle, their job becomes even more difficult, because right behind it is Pandemonium, the dome that houses the war demons. The World Spiral Tree is located in the inner courtyard of the Falcon's castle and is only accessible to his closest circle. Getting to it is practically a suicide mission, which is why the engagement at the Kushan border is so important. If the Kushan forces manage to put even a small dent in Griffith's war demon supply, they'll be disabling his greatest assets. Without the Apostles, accessing Falconia becomes a lot easier, but not easy enough to call it a breeze. This is because, even without Apostles, there's still Griffith to consider. He's the absolute strongest being on the entire planet right now, with control over external space and human souls, making him untouchable literally and spiritually. Even if you neutralize the World Spiral Tree, how can you defeat a man you can't lay a finger on? And then there are the rest of his kinsmen. We haven't seen Void, Slan, Ubik, or Conrad since the Great Roar of the Astral World, and that's more troubling than relieving. We know that in order to stop the God Hand, all of them need to be dealt with, not just one of them. And yet, they've pretty much been missing from the story since we saw them assuming crude forms in chapter 306. What Griffith is doing right now doesn't just bring his dream to life. Through his actions, each individual God Hand member gets their wishes fulfilled as well, because his entire life is based on the grand plan of the idea of evil. If Griffith's life were in mortal danger, we imagine the rest of the God Hand would rush to defend him in a heartbeat. They've been working on this plan for centuries, so imagining them rushing out in full force to defend it is pretty reasonable, we'd say. But that said, now that we have all the major obstacles to ending the Age of Darkness listed, let's get to what you came here for, our take on Berserk's ending. How will the story of Berserk conclude? What we think will be a good ending. The story of Berserk has evolved from a simple revenge tale to one that encompasses abstract concepts like free will and fate. The latter isn't as cool as it's made out to be because in the world of Berserk, the only destiny that awaits mankind is evil. Every single time a human being has embraced their fate, it's resulted in the creation of an apostle, and every 216 years, a God Hand. Succumbing to one's evil is a core aspect of Berserk, which is why Guts is the representation of free will in this story. Despite being bound by the threads of fate and destined to become a demonic sacrifice, he's struggled to stay alive and pursue an impossible goal. In chapter 203, the witch Shirke is appalled by the casual manner in which Guts proclaims that one day he'll have to hurt those angelic demons right where it pained them the most. She thought him a fool or unenlightened, but through her journeys with him, she came to realize he was neither. Guts was the rare kind of person that struggled against the tide of fate just so that he could live his life on his own terms. When he declared war against demonkind, he didn't do it because part of his fate was to end up facilitating Griffith's incarnation. He did it because he wanted to. This conflict between the concepts of destiny and free will is what will frame the final battle of Berserk, and when we put it like that, how can an ending where freedom gets subsumed within a vortex of tortured souls ever feel like a good one? Because, make no mistake, that's the world the God Hand truly wants to build. Have you ever imagined why apostles are hard-coded with loyalty to their masters? It's because to the God Hand, elimination of free will and the unification of mankind into a single entity is the ultimate form of enlightenment. The idea of evil once told Griffith that it was born because humans desired reasons to justify their suffering. As a result, the vortex of souls was born, which now contains thousands of tortured humans, swirling in a mass of torment endlessly. If the population of the world increases at the rate that it does in our world, then the idea of evil would be churning out destinies forever. All actions are geared towards an end result, and for the idea of evil, that end result is to see the day that it no longer has to create reasons for human suffering, because on that day, all humans will suffer as one. Claiming all human souls and packing them into the abyss will create the ultimate monarchy, because that way, no subject could ever defy their ruler's authority. Unlike apostles who still retain a shred of individuality and free will, the souls within the abyss are completely at the God Hand's mercy. The God Hand can summon the vortex anytime it wants, and that's the kind of total authority that an extreme authoritarian like Griffith desires. In the end, Even his citizens aren't safe from him, so stopping him wouldn't only save the world, it would save his followers from a fate they didn't ask for as well. Griffith has already sent scores of human souls into the vortex to become one under the guise of being the Falcon of Light. If he keeps sending his human troops into battle against creatures like the ones that manifested thanks to Fantasia, it won't be long before much of his capital becomes a deserted wasteland. That probably won't bother him as long as people keep feeding his power source and bowing down to his will. So really, the finale of Berserk will have to address every single open thread within the context of fate versus free will. We're operating off the assumption that the latter will win out because we think that's the story Miura was telling. So if that's what's going to happen, then we think the final act of Berserk will see Guts and a core crew of trusted and powerful soldiers infiltrating the Falcon's palace in the cover of night. The Kushan offensive can be a total disaster considering Griffith's overwhelming firepower, but it won't matter in the long run if the right people survive. If Guts, Salat, Daiba, Rickert, Roderick, Serpico, Isidro, and the rest of the gang manage to find their way out of Kushan lands before it's destroyed, then they'll need to head towards Falconia. The first order of business would be to get inside the Falcon's palace, but they'd need to do so without getting detected. The best way to do that is to use the sky paths, and luckily for them, the good guys have someone who can navigate it. Though Shirke isn't back from her astral projection ceremony whereby she can cast her soul into the world tree, she popped back up for a moment at the beginning of chapter 376, which tells us she's just fine. Shirke is probably looking for a way to get her allies into Falconia for an ambush so that they can save Casca anyway. So the more time she spends navigating the dragon path, the better it'll be for her allies. If they get access to sky paths on the eastern side of the world, entering Griffith's capital without his knowledge should become a lot easier. The hard part begins once they enter the castle. Team Guts will have two main objectives, taking out the world spirit tree and rescuing Casca. Right now, Casca is being kept under a trance in Falconia because she's the key to Griffith's only weakness. Every night of the full moon, Griffith turns into the Moonlight Boy because when he was being incarnated, his vessel chose to swallow Guts and Casca's dying demon child, fusing it with his being. As a consequence, whenever the moon is full, the child takes over his body and rushes back to its mother, leaving it vulnerable to attacks from pretty much anyone. If Griffith kidnapped Casca because of this, then that must mean the Moonlight Boy is mortal, and if that's true, then whoever controls Casca controls his destiny. Besides, Guts suffered an entire mental breakdown because he lost her to Griffith once again. We think he'd want to take lead on the Casca rescue mission, like she took lead on the Griffith rescue mission all those years ago. Securing Casca can prove to be extremely tricky because Griffith has posted a lot of guards at her location. She keeps trying to run off to Guts whenever her spell breaks off, and she always kills a couple of guys in the process. Griffith could have beefed up her security with a few trusted apostles that don't crave human flesh like maniacs, and if one of those apostles is Zod, who we know possesses excellent self-control, then the job becomes a lot more difficult. But even if they don't get their hands on Casca, severing the world spiral tree is absolutely critical because this will cut off Griffith's direct control over Earth. Serpico's Sylph Sword is extremely useful at slicing things into ribbons, but the girth of the world tree makes it unlikely he'll get the job done alone. Combining his wind with Isidro's fire-stimulating salamander dagger might just trigger a firestorm hot enough to burn the tree out of existence, so we think that they'll be part of the team that heads for the tree, as will most of the mages, because the world tree is in an open location and one can't exactly cut down a pillar stealthily. Snapping Casca out of her delirium will require only one mage, albeit an extremely strong one, which is why we think Guts and Shirke will go after her, and they might just get some help from Sonya. Cutting off the world tree should cut off the rest of the God Hand's access to the physical world, because unlike Griffith, they didn't go through an elaborate ritual to get a body of flesh. Their manifestations are contingent on the world tree's existence, so if it's destroyed, they can be trapped within different layers of the astral world forever. That will leave only Griffith to deal with, and that isn't exactly going to be easy. Griffith gave up his life, the lives of his comrades, and the lives of thousands of unknown people at St. Albion to get this far in his dream. If Guts goes after the two things that threaten it, he'll retaliate without hesitating, and we don't think he'd even care about exposing his demonic form to his subjects at that point. To defeat Griffith, they need to disable his spatial powers, because without that, they won't be able to touch him. Rickert is the only person that's managed to lay a hand on Griffith since his incarnation, and that just as well could have been Griffith's choice as much as it could have been a causal hiccup. Ironically enough, he's the only character in the entire series that would be an ideal candidate to represent some sort of idea of good, because as Guts once pointed out, Rickert simply cannot hate people. He can dislike them and he can disagree with them, but his heart is too strong to let them affect him longer than he needs to. Maybe he's the one who will take on the burden of actually killing Griffith, and Guts will just act as a distraction. We know the final battle should be between between him and his enemy, but many a time, a story can't be solved with a single sword fight. Maybe his attacks will actually get through to Griffith once he uses the Berserker armor to fight him, because as we've seen time and time again, that thing can smash its way through anything, even Corundum. A wall of space would be a first, but hey, Guts' sword can injure gods like the God Hand. Who's to say the right amount of force won't bypass Griffith's spatial powers? The real question that needs answering is what will happen to Guts and Casca's relationship, because that has emerged as the axis around which a lot of Berserk's current story revolves. Their love was short-lived, but it is the driving force behind Guts' current reformation. Everything he's done since returning to Godot's cave from his Black Swordsman arc exploits has been in service of keeping her safe and secure. Now that she has her mind back for the most part, Casca wants to return the favor, but she's trapped with the very demon that violated and broke her mind in the first place. Casca is the linchpin to making Guts lose control, and that might just be the deciding factor in terms of which side wins. Guts has been flirting the line between good and evil ever since he emerged from the eclipse a broken man, and Casca's recent kidnapping has made him inch further towards the latter. It's in moments of extreme emotional turmoil like the one he's currently experiencing that most apostles are born, and Guts does have a behelit on him. There is a chance that instead of opposing evil, he becomes an instrument of it, but knowing Guts and Miura's intention behind his character, we feel pretty safe in saying that won't happen. But his story with Casca isn't exactly going to end happily ever after either, because like a wise guy once said, Romeo and Juliet isn't a love story, it's two dumb kids who end up dead. Tragedy has been a part of Guts and Casca's relationship from the very beginning. It's what allowed them to open up to each other and become one at heart. It would be soul-crushing, but the sheer poetry of Guts saving the world in exchange for his girl isn't lost on us. Or he could end up being the sacrifice that he was always meant to be, sparing Casca from an eternity of torment. Either way, the two will probably never see each other the way they used to, and there's room enough for only one of them to survive. 1,000 years ago, Skull Knight's lover died in his arms only for him to become a wraith that wanders the endless night. 1,000 years later, his successor will become a shade to protect his lover from death and worse. A perfect ending for Berserk would see Guts and Casca raise their baby boy free of any demonic influence with the world finally at peace, but that's too optimistic for a series like this. So instead, we think that once the gang figures out how to deal with the God Hand problem, root and stem, they'll have to reconcile with Guts' death and carry on his legacy of following one's own heart and mind. The cycle of fate dictates that all men must end up in the misery of the abyss, but Guts' life will prove to people that despite being destined for it, you can struggle and live on for as long as you want to, as free as can be. That's the real ending that awaits every Berserk reader, so we're just waiting to see how the final battle between Guts and Griffith will be presented to us. The Black Swordsman will have to prevail against impossible odds like he's done 1,000 times before, and the law of storytelling dictates that he will, unless Miura really was planning to finish things on a dystopian note. In that case, Griffith and the God Hand will stamp out free will, absorb all humans into their abyss, and go on to spread their influence to worlds beyond Earth. They'll basically create one gigantic galaxy-spanning hive mind with evil in charge. And we don't know about you guys, but that doesn't sound like a world anyone would want to live in, including Griffith's biggest fangirl, Sonia. Marvelous verdict! But as for this video, we're afraid that's all we've got. Trying to predict the ending of a story that isn't even being written by its original author is a tough beat, but we think we know Berserk well enough to tackle such a topic, and we hope we've done it justice. Let us know what you guys think about the ending down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, what with chapters 377 and 378 dropping soon. We'll see you guys with the breakdown videos for those, so until then, this is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but have a nice day and keep on struggling, strugglers.